Hachette Audio presents 1861, The Lost Peace. Written by Jay Winik, foreword by Evan Thomas. Read by Arthur Morey. For E.V. Miller Winik, the amazing gem of my life. For my cherished sons and magnificent budding historians, Evan S. and Nathaniel J. H. Winik. Foreword. We think of Abraham Lincoln as a great humanitarian, statesman, and war leader. But when he arrived in Washington in February 1861 to be sworn in as America's 16th president, he was widely seen as a hick. In the vituperative and vicious press of the era, he was sometimes described as a baboon because of his gangly arms. He had never been an executive of anything or commanded troops in combat. He was at once clever, passionate, and dryly funny, but he was regarded as a poor impromptu speaker. He did not see himself as the great emancipator, nor did he believe the country was on the brink of a civil war. The South, he said, was merely bluffing its secession, though 7 states had already seceded. Stopping in Cleveland on his way to Washington, he told the crowd, "There is really no crisis except an artificial one." Why, he asked, are Southerners so incensed? Have they not all their rights now, as they had ever had? Do not they have their fugitive slaves returned now as ever? Have they not the same constitution that they have lived under for 70-odd years? What, then, is the matter with them? Why all this excitement? Why all these complaints? If Lincoln was unprepossessing, small potatoes, a former cabinet member called him, he was not being unreasonable about the country's situation. Congress was not about to abolish slavery in the states where it was already legal. The question was whether slavery would be permitted in the Western territories. But so far there were very few enslaved people in those territories, whose land for the most part was not well suited to an economy worked by slave labor. Most Americans, at any rate, wanted a compromise, not a civil war. What Lincoln could not quite grasp, even as the evidence mounted all around him, was that Americans were angry, especially at people unlike themselves. America in 1861 was not a mixing bowl. Indeed, as Jay Winik points out in his magisterial history of the outbreak of the Civil War, America was not really a nation in the sense of one people with a shared background and values. The words nation and national appear nowhere in the Constitution. It was the United States, plural. People spoke of being Carolinians or Tennesseans. Secession was in their history, beginning with the secession of the 13 colonies from the British Crown in the American Revolution. By the late 1850s, the poison of slavery had infected even the sacred places. Violence invaded the Capitol building with its shiny new dome. In Congress, a haughty Massachusetts senator named Charles Sumner, an unapologetic Harvard-educated snob, mocked a senator from South Carolina. Using a gold-headed cane, the Southern senator's cousin almost beat Sumner to death, leaving Sumner stricken and bleeding beneath his desk on the Senate floor. Congressmen began coming to work armed with pistols and bowie knives. The political parties were collapsing. The venerable Whig Party, with its great statesmen Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, had devolved into something called the Know-Nothings, who were anti-immigrant and anti-Catholic. Rancor ran everywhere. The Supreme Court had become extreme. In the Dred Scott case, the court ruled that black people, even freed ones, could not be citizens, and that enslaved people were private property. Calumny and insult could flash around the country in a few seconds, thanks to a new technology called the telegraph. The Union was unraveling. First to go was South Carolina, voting to secede on December 20th, 1860. Then came Mississippi on January 9th, followed quickly by Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and, on February 1st, Texas. That month, as Lincoln made his way from his native Illinois to Washington, the threat of assassination was so great that he had to travel part of the way in a train separate from his wife and children. He had to secretly slip through the city of Baltimore in the dead of night, lest he be waylaid by marauders known as plug uglies. Readers of Winik's #1 national bestseller, April 1865, will recall it as a Homeric narrative, an epic drama with plot twists out of Dickens. In 1861, The Lost Peace, Winik offers us all that and shows us more. That history can turn on contingency, on the vagaries of chance and personality, and that it is made by humans whose characters are often contradictory. Major Robert Anderson of the U.S. Army made an unlikely hero. He was shy and sensitive, a sometime poet and prone to illness and depression. Decorated in the Mexican-American War, he said he hated war. Married to a Southern belle, he was sympathetic to the Southern cause and was himself an enslaver. Nonetheless, he felt duty-bound. As the commander of federal troops in Charleston, South Carolina, acting mostly on his own initiative, he occupied Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, raised the Stars and Stripes, and announced that he and his men would die before they surrendered. Suddenly, he became Horatius at the bridge, his modest force of 70 men compared to the Spartan 300 at Thermopylae. Newspaper headlines shouted his name. A fuse had been lit. In Washington, President Lincoln, brand new in his job, appeared overwhelmed, isolated, his authority undermined. "The man is not equal to the hour," said Charles Francis Adams, Sr., one of the grandees of Lincoln's Republican Party. The President's Secretary of State, William H. Seward, who fancied himself in every way Lincoln's superior except in title, was secretly negotiating with the Confederates, assuring them that Fort Sumter would be relinquished. With the country on the brink of war, Seward tried to bully the President into dealing with the secessionists, with Seward himself as policymaker. But then came one of those moments when a man, through force of personality, changes history. Let author Winik tell the story. Rather than potentially escalate matters, the President chose not to rebuke him, Seward, in writing. John G. Nicolay and John M. Hay, Lincoln's secretaries, later noted that a less gracious president would have swiftly dismissed Seward. Aware of the difficulties that lay ahead, Lincoln instead wisely confronted Seward in private. He rejected his advice, sharply disagreeing that the administration had no policy. On the question of who actually carries out policy, Lincoln was emphatic. "I must do it," he countered, because he was president. Finally, he eschewed any smothering of cabinet discussion. "I am entitled to have the advice," he said, "of all the cabinet." Backed into a corner, Seward suddenly appreciated Lincoln as a vigorous leader. As he learned, Lincoln could be pushed only so far. "Executive force and vigor are rare qualities," ashamed Seward wrote to his wife. "The President is the best of us." From then on, Seward became the President's most faithful cabinet secretary. And so it began. Fort Sumter was besieged and fought back. War erupted. After 4 bloody years, the Union was restored. The enslaved people were freed. At the end, Lincoln was killed by an assassin who also grievously wounded William H. Seward. It is impossible to know how our own tortured age will play out, whether democracy will survive and the anger that divides us will somehow abate. But it is fascinating and instructive to go back, in the skilled hands of Jay Winik, to a similarly chaotic time before the fall, when the peace was lost. Evan Thomas, Washington, February 2024. Prelude. New Year's Day, in the United States. On New
Sample complete. Ready to continue?